Welcome back to decimals. We're still dividing, but now the divisor is going to be a decimal. So before we take a look at some examples and our steps, I want to just kind of talk about something that's going to help make the steps make more sense. We're going to be doing what I typically call shifting the decimal to the right. Whenever you shift a decimal to the right, you're actually multiplying by a power of 10. So I've listed a few of the more common ones. So when I multiply by 10, that's the same thing as 10 to the first power, and that is moving the decimal one place to the right. So it's like a shortcut. Multiplying by 100 is 10 to the second, so that moves it two places. Multiplying by 1,000, which is 10 to the third power, moves the decimal to the right three places. So, for example, let's go back to, say, a simple fraction like we worked with in our previous unit. We learned that it's okay to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same value. So if I multiply this is technically my dividend, by 10, that's okay as long as I do the same thing with the divisor. And I end up with 20 over 30, which is really the same thing. So if I were to take some other looking division problem, say like 0.4 divided by 5.61. Now remember, the fraction bar really just means division. So I'm writing it this way on purpose right now just to show why our rule in a minute is going to work. So if I wanted to make this divisor down here on the bottom, it's what you're dividing by, a whole number, I would need that decimal to move two places. So that is the same as me multiplying by 100. So when multiplying the numerator and denominator by 100 is the same thing as multiplying the divisor and the dividend by the same amount, or shifting the decimal. So it's going to shift two places, so that will become 561. And on top, it has to shift two places. So there is 1 and there is 2. So what this is showing is that, get my highlighter going here, is that this fraction, which is really ugly, decimals within a fraction are not very pretty, is the same as this fraction. So we're going to be changing our division problem of ugly decimals into partly, at least the dividend is going to be, not the dividend, I'm sorry, the divisor is going to be a whole number. But I wanted you to see why it's okay, why it works. So I've kind of just written a list of the steps right here, which we'll just walk through briefly. The key is this very first step. The divisor has got to be a whole number. So we're going to shift it to force it to be whole. But if it changes, then the dividend has to change also. So I wrote on number 2, however many decimal point moves you made to the divisor, you have to do that to the dividend. Then you're just going to divide normally and bring the decimal up, just like we did in 5.3a. Step number 4 will elaborate on some here and some in the next video. Sometimes you have to add zeros and keep dividing until one of two things happens. You get no remainder, or you start to get a repeating decimal. So we'll just be neat and very clear. One of the problems with decimals is it's really easy to misread what you've written if you're not really clear. A decimal point might look like a piece of eraser guts, as I like to call it, on your paper. So you got to be kind of clean and neat. So I've referenced a few problems from the same pages where some of your homework comes from. So remember, your division here is not scratch work. The division you show is your support. So the only thing you would do on scratch paper is trying to figure out how many times something goes into something. So remember, this is your divisor. That's the number you're dividing by. You have to force that to be whole. So you would have to move the decimal one place to the right. So if you do that, it's going to make that a 4. So what you do to the divisor, you have to do to the dividend. So this would be 25.2. That's the division problem you're going to work. Do you see how you've just forced it right here to become a problem just like what we did in the previous section? So 4 divided into 25.2. Bring that decimal up at the very beginning, and then just do regular division. So 4 into 25, 6, subtract, bring down, and this one works out to have no remainder. Nice, pretty, easy. Let's try another one. Actually, let's check our answer. I've been talking about checking. To check, we need to show that 4 times 6.3 should come out to be 25.2. So you get 12, 24, 25. You have to move the decimal one place over, so it checks. All right, let's try the next one. Remember, the divisor is the number you're dividing by. So we've got to move the decimal 3 places over to make it a 3. So this one has to move 3 places over. So that'll be 573.3. Then you just write it as long division and start the process. 573.3. So 3 into 5 once. Oops, that's a 3. 3 into 27, 9. 3 into 3 once. 3 into 3, oops, bring your decimal up once. And I'll write it right here, but I'm going to get no remainder again. So neat and tidy little problem right there. The key, and just of course, as you can assume, the biggest mistake made is just getting the decimal in the wrong location. So the key step really is right here. Rewriting it so that the divisor is a whole number. If you can get this step right, and over here you're just lifting it up, just raising it up into the quotient. Let's try number 24. Now, this one you have to actually divide a little longer, so I wouldn't write really hugely on my paper here because you're going to need some of this space. So think about in your mind where you're going to, how many places you need to move the decimal. Remember, it's not the first one that we're trying to make a whole number. That's a mistake a lot of people make too. It's the divisor. So you only want to shift the decimal one place. So this becomes a 12, and this one would become 108.75. Now, you would still get the same result if you moved, if you'd made the original a whole number. I mean, not the original, the first one, the 10.875. You just make your division a lot harder when you do that, because instead of having 12, you would have 1200, and it would just make it a lot more challenging. So now you write your long division problem. Really try to spread out. Don't try to make it super small. See, 12 into 108 goes 9 times. 12 won't go into 7. Remember, every time you bring down, you have to divide. So 12 doesn't go into 7. So I bring down again. 12 goes into 75, not evenly, but it will go 6 times, and I get 72. Well, I don't stop just because I'm at the end of the decimal. So if you go back to your steps, that fourth step said you have to keep going until you have no remainder or it begins to repeat. So this is that situation. So I'll just write that in another color. Now I'm having to add a 0. I may have to add more, but we'll see. So if I bring down 12 into 30, doesn't go evenly, but it will go 2 times. That's 24. That's 6. Still have a remainder here, so I have to add another 0. Bring it down. Unfortunately, 12 is going to go into 60 evenly, because it goes 5 times. But I'll just, 12 times 5 is 60, and there's your no remainder. So sometimes this is the downside of decimal division. When you divide just whole numbers and try to get a fraction, you don't have to continue on with the division. But we want your answers in decimal form here. We did not check number 23, but I want you to stop the video right now and go back and check number 23 and number 24. Okay, well, I realized something as I was checking. I realized when we checked our first problem up here, number 21, and I've highlighted it in blue, I actually just checked, just looking at my division problem. When you check, you really should go back and use the original values. So I should have been checking 0.4 times 6.3 so that I can make sure I really get my original 2.52. So just make a note there that we should have used the original values to check. Then I just highlighted my work that I just asked you to do. So number 23 on the check, I went back to my original. I took this is my quotient, this is my original divisor, and this is my dividend. That's why it checks. So always go back to the original. Just double check your work. Over here, I just wrote myself a note, use original. So again, we took our this was our quotient. This was our original divisor, and we got our dividend, our original dividend. If you don't check with the original, then you may have made an error in shifting the decimal and such. So you have to check with the original. So hopefully you got those correct. Almost there. Got another page. This can be tricky, so I didn't want to scrimp on you. So a couple of problems on your homework are written a little differently, but basically you're doing the same thing. They're giving you an expression. Remember, evaluate just means find the value of the answer. So it says r divided by 4.17. So they're telling you r, so you're just substituting 10.5918 divided by 4.17. So now, since our divisor is a decimal, we have to force it to be whole. So we have to move it 2 places. So we do the same thing over here. So we're going to work the problem 1059.18 divided by 417. Now, I just like to write it over here like that before I actually do the division, but that's certainly not a requirement. But in your division, in your work over here that we're about to do right now, I don't suggest that you have a lot of little scoops. That really makes it confusing for you and anyone looking at your work. Let's go ahead and get that decimal up in our quotient where it's going to go. So 417 goes into 1059 twice. I just think of it as the 4. 4 times 2, or 400 times 2 would be 800. 400 times 3 would be 1200, which is too big. And then, if you can, practice multiplying without going to the side on scratch work. Oh, and I just realized something that you might have done. See how I wrote that 2 awfully close to that decimal point? There's really a space in between there. Let's clean that up a little bit. This 2 really Whoops. This 2, oh my lord, sorry. I'm just going to write that again. $417 is our divisor. 1059.18. I'm really kind of glad I did that because it really is easy to mess up. But now I see I actually really did want my 2 right there. So it was just kind of confusing. The 2 is over the 9. So 2 times 417. I'm just thinking 2 times 400 is 800. 2 times 17 is 34. So it's 834. So I just challenge you to think like that so that you can maybe do a little bit less scratch work. Then we subtract and bring down. Remember, you don't divide until you bring down. So 417 into 2251, I'm thinking 400 times 500 would be 2,000, which looks good. 400 times 6 would be 2,400, which is too big. So that makes me think it's a 5. 5 times 417 is 2085. Then I need to subtract. And once I subtract, I'll bring down. So I'd be careful when I'm subtracting, you know, just mark out things lightly when you're doing it to keep things kind of neat. I get 166, and then I need to bring down. And then I need to divide again. 417 into 1668 actually goes 4 times. 4 times 17 is 68, and 4 times 400 is 1600. So 1668 makes sense. Or do a little work on scratch. That's kind of the yucky part of decimal division, is all the scratch work you have to do. Well, since we have no remainder, we can just box our result. To check, in the video, I'm not going to go through the whole check, but on your homework, you're asked to do the division and check as a separate problem. So let's just write down what we would be checking. You're going back to your original, which my original is really what's here in the red. So I'm trying to show that 4.17 times our quotient, 2.54, should come out to be our dividend. I'll put question mark. Is it 10.5918? So that's what you want to work and make sure that it actually equals. Well, let's do our last problem, which is a word problem. And I just wanted to point out, I chose this problem on purpose because of the word per. Per is sort of a giveaway a lot of times that you're going to divide, and the problem actually tells you how to divide. So per means divide. So if I have this one on the average, let's see, after driving so many miles, the York family filled up with 10.5 gallons. On the average, how many miles, oh, I left off an S there, how many miles did they drive per gallon of gas? Well, so you want miles per gallon. So that means miles divided by gallons. Well, their miles is 216.3, and they drove that many miles on 10.5 gallons of gas. So here's our division problem to work out. Remember, the divisor has to be whole, so you have to shift it once. So if you shift it once over there, you have to shift it once over here. So now our new division problem is 105 for the divisor. Our dividend is now 2,163. Sometimes I like to go ahead and just put the decimal at the end. I don't know if I'll have to keep going, but if it doesn't go a whole number amount of times, I know that I will. Well, 105 into 216, I know that goes 2 times. That would be 210. Subtract, and then bring down. So technically right now, oh, sorry, I already did bring down. I brought down, 105 doesn't go into 63, so that's a 0. So I add a 0, and I bring that down, and then I keep dividing. So just think 100 into 600 would go 6 times. So it looks like this one's going to go evenly, since 6 times 5 is 30. I get 630. So now I need to answer the question. Let's think. Does it make sense for them to give our answer in a decimal or a fractional amount? Well, it does, because miles can be measured fractionally. So 20.6 miles per gallon. If we were going to check this one, we would need, let's show what we would do to check. I'll write it over here. Remember, you want to check in your original problem. That was right here. So we want to show that 10.5 multiplied by 20.6 actually equals, I'll just put a question mark there. We're trying to show that that comes out to be 216.3. So you have to really be careful when you're checking about not looking at this, because we adjusted our numbers there. You really have to go back to your original problem. That's why it's good to write it down so that you can see it clearly when you get ready to check. And then you would just multiply this out, and it actually does check because I checked it on my work. So there you have really probably one of the most challenging parts of this decimal unit, is dividing with decimals. So you're really going to want to count on your counterpart, your partner, and kind of keeping each other in check on your decimals, and doing the physical check, multiplying after you divide to make sure that you haven't made a mistake. That just gives you more practice with multiplication, which is another part of the unit. So it's really a win-win for everybody. So get out there, Decimal Duo, and do your stuff with decimals.